This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. Detroit, the once and future king of manufacturing, is a broke city. It has too much land and too few people. It needs the work. It needs the jobs. Donald Trump says he will make Detroit build again, and it's just what the comeback city needs. Except when a Goshen comes to Michigan to build EV batteries, it looks past Detroit for the cornfields of Big Rapids. When Ford partners with a Chinese company for a battery park, it steps over Detroit for Marshall. And when a high-tech manufacturing concern needs a home, it looks to rural Lansing rather than Detroit. Any manufacturing concern in Detroit in the modern day would be greeted as a liberator. For Mayor Mike Duggan, this would be proof of concept. It would show that nature is healing, that water flows to its level, that Detroit was the king of manufacturing once upon a time and would be again. Instead, in these three scenarios, Detroit has gone 0 for 3. So Detroit, we have a city that needs the jobs and the money that jobs would generate, and it goes 0 for 3. And you have rural communities that don't want these companies and don't want these projects and don't want these jobs. They don't want the despoiling of their tax base forced on them, and yet government officials are dead set determined to do just that. What's wrong with this picture? Well, it's the same thing wrong with Michigan partnering with the Swiss nonprofit, the World Economic Forum, for a Center for Advanced Manufacturing. None of what I've described today was done to boost Detroit or Michigan, but to devalue Detroit in the eyes of the world. Let's think about the Ford project in Marshall. When Ford wanted to build electric vehicles, when Henry Ford wanted to do that, he wrote a blank check to Thomas Edison. When Bill Ford wants to build them, he calls the Chinese. Henry Ford's American plan was a better vision for Michigan than this globalized mindset that Gretchen Whitmer has introduced. It would have never occurred to Henry Ford to take a backseat to the Chinese or a governor in his lifetime to facilitate this. Unfortunately, for me and my 10 million neighbors in Michigan, Henry Ford's not walking through that door. You can't pronounce the names of the people who are walking through that door. And due to the web of secrecy and non-disclosure agreements, you won't even know their names, and you certainly won't know their game until it's too late, until the deals are signed and the ink is dry. My guest today is Troy Stroud. He's supervisor of Eagle Township in rural Lansing. Eagle Township was kind of the first one to get hit by the megasite virus. It's a template that you've heard about in our episode with Lori Brock, talking about her fight with Goliath Goshen. Lori Brock and her neighbors have taken on Goliath. They've slung stones. They've won races, and they appear to be winning right now. Troy took over the big chair in Eagle Township last year in a recall. When he did take office, he found that he and his new colleagues were bound by a 12-year non-disclosure agreement, which was actually approved by the previous board. The rural fixation of these megasites is worrisome. Detroit is a city of 139 square miles, much of it empty, much of it could be put to better use than it currently is. Room exists and room can be cleared for a megasite that would make Detroit build again. Detroit is in such a bad way that people might even be willing to overlook the Chinese associations, so long as the community benefits agreement looks good. With an obvious win-win scenario available in Detroit, the powers that be in Michigan have instead targeted our rural communities. At stake now is their rural character, environmental purity, and even the tax base of these communities. So when you hear about something like a megasite, you might think that that's going to be a windfall for your community. You might not know that it means the exact opposite. When you hear megasite, you should think welfare recipient. Not only are your fellow Michiganders cutting a check so a politician can claim they've created jobs, but these projects affect local finances too. So yeah, you might think that a new plant in town would boost the tax base of a town. And in Henry Ford's day, that was true. In a capitalist system, it would be true. But under the crony socialism in Michigan, the cost of these projects are socialized and the benefits are privatized. And so these incentive packages for megasites often divert tax money that would be fed into the school system back into the company. Or other times, companies are allowed to do tax capture, where the taxes their employees would pay to the state are instead paid back to the company. These are not businesses in the way we think of business when we say that word. Our media in Michigan is complicit in our misunderstanding. When J.D. Vance spoke recently at Eastern Market, reporters for the Detroit papers asked why Vance would stand in the way of a $500 million federal grant for an EV project that GM wants. Imagine being a reporter in Michigan, the state that Henry Ford built. There literally would not be black people in Michigan but for Henry Ford. Imagine using the credibility of your station as a reporter to ask questions of the powerful, but never thinking to ask Mary Barra, CEO of GM, hey, Mary, why don't you just call the bank? $500 million is not a lot of money for a company like GM, but too often is the case in Michigan, our media, companies like GM, politicians like Gretchen Whitmer, all pretend together that an entire factory that would be built by one of the biggest companies on earth hangs on less than $1 billion handout from the government. This is the kind of conspiracy of stupidity we're up against at the Enjoyer. This isn't just stupid. This is a Russian novel of stupidity. This is stupidity that takes twists and turns. So then why then would a megasite used to build EV batteries want to set up shop in rural Michigan? Why would they plow over the heartland rather than look over to Detroit and its many native advantages? When people like Lori Brock in Big Rapids or Troy Stroud in Eagle Township went looking for answers, they found their local governments to be less than helpful. They didn't find advocates at City Hall or whatever they call them in townships. They found that their leaders had signed non-disclosure agreements on big projects that would affect their future. The face of their communities would change if these plants were built, but no one even thought to ask their permission or what they thought about it. Nobody thought to move with transparency, getting to know the people and bringing relief about the project and the motives of the people doing it. These days in Michigan, when progress comes to town, it's not asking. When it comes to your town, what would you do? Well, let's learn today about what Troy Stroud did do and is doing. So, Troy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Troy, we'll start you with an easy one. It's our standard first question here. What do you enjoy about Michigan?
I like the outside, the outdoors. I really enjoy the wildlife we have here in Eagle. I like farming. And I like my neighbors. I mean, those are the greatest things in Michigan.
Absolutely. It's either, these answers tend to fall into one of two categories or both. It's either the wildlife and our natural beauty in Michigan, or it's family. There's so many family ties that we struggle to think of any other places as a possible home. So that was a very Michigan enjoyer answer. Troy, what was the situation in Eagle Township when you first learned of this big manufacturing campus that was coming to your humble farming community?
When we first learned about it, it was already a year and a half, 2 years in the making. And right out of the gate, they told us this is a done deal. You're going to have a megasite. And we're like, excuse us? A what? A where?
Right.
And it was a gift given to Michigan State University by a community member when he passed away and went to MSU. MSU was the first one who said, hey, this would be a great place on pristine farmland to build a factory. And MEDC and through LEAP, that's where they built the case of we've got 12 to 1,400 acres to start with. And then they went out and, worked with other people that lived around there and got them to all sign up to sell. No one actually did sell. So they used taxpayer dollars to sign commit to sell agreements with a dozen or so of our neighbors. And that's where we walked into this, finding out that, hey, this is already going to be done.
What's your understanding of why Michigan State would be open to this kind of thing? I mean, it's a land grant school. It's a farming college in its roots. This doesn't sound like something they should be doing.
Well, when you give to a university, the devil's in the details. The gentleman who put his money or his land to MSU didn't have it say he wanted a research station in his name. That's what he intended, was what much of the community believes, that it was supposed to be a research station in his name. And he left it to be leased for another, I don't know, I think it's got 6-7 years left on the lease to the farmer who's doing it, who's in the neighborhood, actually raising crops on it. Why MSU would want to sell it? I mean, they've had some hard times. Maybe they need the money. Maybe they just don't want property right 15 minutes from campus. I mean,
Right.
you'd think being an ag school, that it'd be prime right here in the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
So, at the end of the day, we've never gotten a good answer from them. Their answer always falls back on they wanted to sell it because one of the things that can be done with the money once it's sold is go to there's a retirement home and a couple other things that could get additional money from this.
Okay.
Same time, I mean, MSU could just buy it outright from the rest of it and just make more college farmland out of it. I mean, they are an ag college, or it used to be.
And your neighbors, when you talk to your neighbors, why were they just tired of being farmers? Like, what happened where they would have to know by the connotation of the word megasite that this would mean that 20 years from now it'd be different than it is now? What were they thinking?
So this was a PR campaign. They literally, they hired a PR campaign to handle this. They being LEAP through MEDC, they literally went around and said, this is going to, it's a patriotic thing to sell into this. This is going to create jobs because your community's on the decline. Your income is below the poverty level in your community. Of course, none of these things are true. We're not below the poverty level. We've continued to gain jobs and gain our median income in this township when many others have fallen. We have incredibly high outcomes for our students here. So what we have going here works. It works really well, actually. We're producing some amazing young people through our school systems.
Right.
We're at a stage generation wise where probably 40 to 60% of the farmland is passing from the older generation to the next generation. And with the high property taxes and high property values that have been forced on us the last few years through inflation, through corporations being allowed to buy up homes and farmland, it's really taken the cost up. But it doesn't mean we're not doing well here. If anything, it means what we have here is worth more.
Right.
I have one neighbor who's talked about why, and he was one of the last people to actually commit to sell. And, they were offering huge amounts of money, like a third of what his property was worth. And by the time he got done, he got more than that. And they had LEAP people go to their houses. They had MEDC people go to the houses. Some of them, they told us this project comes in. Sure,
let's explain what LEAP and MEDC are.
We call them the ABC. Mafia. So Michigan Development Corporation, that's funded through the SOAR fund. It's supposed to help Michigan grow. Now they use sub-companies who are private, but function on LEAP, for example. That's Lansing Economic.
So it's like basically the Lansing Economic Development Association, a similar one in Big Rapids, took the right place. They took the lead on the Goshen project. And so it's these public-private partnerships.
But see, that's what gets so weird about this is because, they're taking our taxpayer dollars, they give it to LEAP. The only accountability you get on what LEAP does with this money is you can go look at their tax returns that are filed on where they spent that money a year after. You can't FOIA them. They're private.
So your money, your public money gets sent into a black hole where there can be no public oversight because there's nothing to FOIA unless you have some kind of, subpoena power. You only know what they tell you when they tell you.
If they tell you. If they want to tell you, yes. Now, then you get into they use the NDAs within their group. So LEAP, most of the companies that do business for them have to be members of LEAP. So they've paid for the privilege of getting contracts from LEAP. And part of getting the contracts for the megasite was they too signed NDAs.
So basically, everyone in your township hall and in your chamber of commerce is complicit in this by the time the average person in the community even learns of it.
So when we started out, they had people at the county level signed the NDAs. Now, eventually that fell through when it came out because they didn't bother to have their board vote on it like we did. Now, our board, when it came to them, they signed our supervisor to an NDA, and then the supervisor took it to the rest of the board already being under an NDA and asked them to sign an NDA and said, we have to have a seat at the table. And we have to sign the NDA to have a seat at the table. Now, the weird thing is, it's our table.
Right.
It's our township. And here they flip the narrative that they're going to do this with or without you. Well, they can't do it without you.
They can't do it without you. That's what I don't get about this. I mean, I've seen businesses that weren't asking for anything. They were just saying, here's what we want to do, here's what we want to build, or here's what we want to renovate. And you have to even explain that to the town fathers and zoning and all that stuff. How could this stuff be done without consent?
So then we don't have our own, at the time, we didn't have our own zoning in Eagle Township. So we're bouncing back between our meetings and the county meetings and the county planning commission meetings. And then we find out 2 or 3 of the people at the county level have the NDAs signed on. Later, now that we've seen some more of the emails, they had been in on it for at least a year ahead of time, but they were pushing to change our future zoning map. Now, so that kind of fell through. And we then find out they had a 425. Now, for those of you who aren't, big on the township and county governance, a 425 is an agreement for annexing. So they had 9 square miles of our township they wanted to annex to Grand Ledge. That's the city just south of us. And you're like, well, why would they do that? Because then in the agreement, it basically said anybody who wanted water and sewer would then go to Grand Ledge, which is a city, and they would decide what the zoning was for the property. So they could flip the zoning just by asking for sewer and water.
Incredible. And 9 square miles, I mean, we should, a township is 36 square miles.
It's a fourth of the township.
Literally a fourth of the township. That would then be under the aegis of Grand Ledge City for its zoning and for, right? I mean, so again, another step away from local decisions and local character.
Right. So that wouldn't even have been part of Eagle anymore. It'd be part of Grand Ledge. So at that point, they're not even they've just pushed that whole area off. And as we're in it, see, we didn't know about that until really recently. That fell through because they couldn't agree on the amount of money that the two would be exchanging. So we got lucky. Then they had a study for the future planning done by Giffords and Webster, and they did it at the Eagle Park, which is it's a venue for like fairground. We'll call it a fairground. It's similar to fairground. They have like concerts and car races and all sorts of stuff there. So we have this Giffords and Webster study there, and they come in and they tell us all these things, how, we're just in a decline, our community's falling apart, we don't have enough jobs. But at the same time, we have some, lots of people who work for the state in Eagle. We have lots of smart people. It's like, no, we have almost zero unemployment here. We have good job growth, good housing growth, good property growth. Our median income's almost double what they said it was. But they come in with this whole thing about, well, it would be better if you had a factory. It would be, and when the factory comes, you could have parks and you could have, trails and bike trails and all these things that it's like, but we already have that. If I want to ride my bike, I just go out on the dirt road and ride down the road. There's nobody here. And so the whole thing was, kind of stacked. Like, we're going to do this, and this is what you could get out of it. When it's supposed to be about what is the future.
And I was reading some MEDC statement. So this is the State Economic Development Group. They're the one who it gives the dent of officialness when the state gives a big incentive to a thing like Goshen. These are like the bureaucrats who do the negotiating behind the scenes. Then by the time the politicians, the deal is put in front of them, their basically only job is to say yes, because the idea is that the bureaucrats have done the work. So MEDC, but yeah, I remember one of the things they said is that their hope with these megasites is to diversify communities. Did you know your community needed to be diversified?
Apparently. It's not real. I mean,
they presented like you guys are like the Make-A-Wish kids, and this is all some favor being done. Meanwhile, we have a community that does need the favor being done. Yeah. I mean, has that ever come up as you've had these conversations, which is, hey, guys, Why not go to
Well,
Detroit?
so here's one of the things. They literally had 5 or 6 PR firms. Of course, we can't find the FOIAs on it. We can't actually prove it, but just different firms that were putting signs up. They did campaigns against us. Literally like billboard on the side of the exit by Eagle. It says, you need to be part of this. The MMI campus is going to be
Wow.
changing your neighborhood. It's the future. It's the patriot,
Right.
all these
Right.
catchphrases. And we're like, it's like they're running an election campaign against us. So in a way, though, they taught us how to fight back because we
Mm.
have this little sweet grandma. Her name's Corey, and she's one of the first people that ran a red flag. Somebody said something to her, and she's like, we all got to start going to these meetings, figure out what's going on. We got to organize. So she's old school. So we all go over to her house. We all sit down. She's like, I need people to do this. I need people to look at this. I need people to go to these meetings. And I mean, we're just boom, boom, boom. She's got people going everywhere. And we all love Corey. So, of course, we're like, sure.
Right.
Now, mind you, Corey's house would have butted right up to where the site's going to be. She would have been looking right at it, ground zero.
Right.
So someone goes and gets a bunch of red hats. They say no Eagle megasite on it. That became our theme. Actually, then we can't get a break with our township board. So then we're like, what do we got to do? And we're talking about, well, maybe, the person will see it our way if we keep telling them, and we keep thinking. And then there's 3 of us old guys sitting around, and one of them says, hey, I think the only way we're going to do this is a recall. And he's like, my son came up with this language, and we got to just decide when we're going to put this in. And we're kind of looking at the calendar, and it's like, if we don't do it now, we're going to miss. We're not going to have enough time to do it. So I drove up to St. John's, put it in. And that's the one that started the recall.
When was this?
This would have been 12 months ago.
So this was like a shotgun recall.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we literally hit just enough time to have it in, and then just enough time to get the signatures. And we pulled an extra 100 signatures just because you got to have a buffer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But then they don't like the language. We used, we called it a megasite, and they're like, well, is it really a megasite? And they had all these picky things they didn't like about it. So when we get there, the former supervisors are challenging the language of the recall. The governor's lawyer shows up to represent her. Same guy was on the campaign trail with her. Same guy that got pictures of her and Governor Whitmer. Well, let's find out he's representing other people in the recalls as a donation. It's like, from who?
So this is like some of the most powerful people in the state, basically, against a group of neighbors.
Yeah. Well, and they just didn't realize that we're kind of stubborn people here in Eagle. They're like, well, you just got to stop. This is going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. And we're like, we're just going to fight you all the way. And so we did. We walked, we knocked on doors, we did the whole, we got the signatures. Then the recall starts. We went through the whole recall process. There were signs all up and down the streets because people were donating, their own money, going out and buying stacks of signs that said no Eagle megasite. So
what was it? Was it the way they did it? Was it kind of the feel of it? Was it the change to the rural character? What was it that made this project objectionable?
Well, it just started off with, we're going to do this and we don't care what you think. That's what really kicked it off.
It's not what you say, it's how you say it. What if they come in as neighbors and said, not told you that it's your lucky day, but kind of tried to convince you that it was? Maybe explain how it could be.
Back then, this wasn't anything like this is a lucky day, nothing that this is going to be. No, they came in with, America needs this. Never mind our neighborhood, never mind our state. America needs this.
America.
This is a patriotic thing that we're going to do for you.
So in essence, it overrides your needs because this is for the good of the country.
Oh, yeah, this is for the greater good.
Be selfish, yeah.
But then we come down to who's buying. Well, we don't have a buyer. Well, then what are you spending all the money on? We're prepping the site. And then that brought into, and they kept saying weird things that didn't make sense. Like at one point, one of the people who was pushing it said, well, this will be $1 trillion project.
Trillion?
Excuse me. Yeah. So we're like, how big is this going to be if it's $1 trillion project?
It's going to be bigger than Apple. It would have to be bigger than Apple to be a trillion.
So we're like, every new project in Michigan is going to be built in Eagle for the next 10 years?
Right.
Well, in their failed 24, or for 25, they had a section of Eagle that was going to be high density housing. And they were talking about needing housing for 90,000 people while they build this. Yeah, it's like, what are you building? Micron moved away. Micron's only still talking about if it was fully open and everything was going, 3,000 people working there?
Holy cow.
So what is this?
90,000. It's like they're trying to build a new Spartan stadium.
Yeah, it's like, how many, and they're talking years to build this. And it's like, so what were you thinking you're building?
And that's what I find. So this feels like if we build it, they will come, which is not really a business move.
No, not at all. And it wasn't even if we build it, they'll come. This is, we're going to prep it and they'll come. And you got the bid work, because we've seen some of the paperwork from the governor. The first one came out from the governor, welcoming a client that's blacked out. We assume it's Micron, but we don't actually know. Now, you look at the footprint of all the other stuff that's going in for megasites, you could have fit that all in the land that they wanted to take. So were we the megasite to start with? Maybe. Again, it goes back to we won't know because you can't get them to actually acknowledge it. But that gets into what we've talked about a couple of times with the layering of these projects.
Right.
So we started out the Eagle Megasite, and they were upset because we kept calling it the Eagle Megasite. Well, they changed the name of their project at least 2 other times. So imagine you're trying to FOIA this. You got to have it by time period. You got to have it by name, and you got to narrow it down. Well, if you call it the wrong name at the wrong period, you probably won't get anything. Then the part that you'd actually think you use an NDA to protect, which is the buyer, the information about the buyer, the amount of the bids, size of the project kind of stuff, they call that the project. So you got a site and a project. So you got 2 halves. It kind of reads like a spy novel. So we know Micron came here. That was Project Copper. Project Tiger came through. We never got to know who Project Tiger was. May of last year, a whole tour bus with MEDC and LEAP and some people who looked very Chinese and sounded very Chinese came here. We never got to know what buyer that was. It's still information they won't share.
How would this look? Let's just, forget who's doing it. Company Acme is coming to town. How should it look compared to how it has looked with this megasite? Well,
if you had something that fit in Eagle, you'd come to the township board and you'd say, hey, you're at your standard monthly meeting. Hey, we'd like to come here and build this. Talk to the community. Convince them why they need this.
Right.
But the things that scared us was they had a permit through Eagle, the environmental agency, to put in 112-inch wells. They were talking about pumping water out of the 2 rivers we have and taking a pipeline from Lake Michigan. These were all things that were floating around. They wanted to move the main road into Grand Ledge. So M100, move it. Just drop it 3-4 roads over, reroute it through a residential neighborhood. Put a new bridge across the Grand into Grand Ledge. These were all things that were floating around. Now, mind you, you can't actually get this on paper because MDOT was also part of this, and they signed everybody who worked on it to NDAs. So it's like everywhere you go, they sign them to NDAs.
What you told me about finding out that you're bound by an NDA that you never signed yourself.
Yes.
Blew my mind.
So they had the former supervisor sign 2. One the day before she presented it, and one the day they voted on it as a board. So I'm bound by the one that the board approved for the township. It's not just the township. It's not just the township board. It's everybody who works for the township is also now under it. We could have 3-4 supervisors and, you could have multiple supervisors in that time period. They'd all still be under it. Now, that's my thing. So you have a couple of reps and, the 77th, a neighbor of mine, Katie Ness Smith, is running against Emily Diefendorf. If Katie wins, is she still under it too? Because that one that's the other thing. The politicians were 4 years. All the local people were 12 in the businesses.
What are the legalities of that? I mean, if that were challenged,
is
it thought to be a challengeable issue? You know what I mean? Like on your part, like saying, hey, I need to get up from under this thing. I can't have
here's
this.
The thing, though. So you're fighting the state. The state doesn't cost anything. They can throw all the lawyers they want at you.
Right.
I'd have to pay to get out from under it. My township, my neighbors, we'd have to pay to fight for this.
Is there anything that can be done to keep something like this to basically say this is not a power that a township board has. Like,
No, because it comes from the state.
Could you bind future township boards in the same way you were bound?
Maybe. But then it goes back to, because the state says it's okay, then you're local government versus state government. They could just pass a law that says what we say at a township level doesn't matter. That's what they did with wind and solar.
Right.
They literally tried to say that what you want at a local level doesn't matter. Some unelected bureaucrats in Lansing have more authority over what's built in your backyard than you do.
And our media in Michigan is so bombed out that you had Dan Scripps, appointed by Gretchen Whitmer, going around to lawmakers saying Dan Scripps should be more powerful, and no one thought that was strange in the least.
Well, it just goes back to this fundamental shift, and I think people are finally catching on that, wait a minute, our media is just parroting what they're told to parrot.
Right.
They're not actually investigating. They're not actually being forthright with it. They're click hunting. They just want people to read their paper. That's their business. And then it's we need to change. People need to wake up. People need to get involved with their local township and city government. They need to get involved with their school boards again. We have to start saying some of this stuff doesn't make sense. It's fundamentally not how our country is supposed to run.
Help me understand what your life would look like if none of this had happened, right? There's no megasite, so there's no recall. There's no election.
I would
and you're
not be
supervisor.
Supervisor.
Help me understand, what your life would look like absent this.
It would be a lot quieter.
And what makes this worth it? What makes this fight worth it?
Well, the first reason I really stepped up is because we didn't have anybody else willing to do it. I had the fortune of, I went to Michigan State University. I have a master's. I've done a lot of public speaking. So when we get all these people together, everybody's like, well, we don't know what to say. We don't want to be in front of a camera. We don't want to do interviews, podcasts. And I'm like, I don't mind. I'll do it. And a lot of the people that were going to be substantially impacted by this, they're retired. Right. They have enough to be happy. They got a great house in the country. They got grandkids to worry about. They're trying to live out the golden years of their life. And here comes the megasite saying, well, we're going to do this. We don't care what you think. And you don't matter. And that's been my message the whole time. My community matters. These people who live here, they are here by the hard work and labor they put into being here. And just because the government wants something doesn't mean it's entitled to it.
So you told us earlier where things stood when you first got involved. Now you have some aspect of control. You have say. Very least you have a seat at the table, even the big chair at the table. Where are things now with the megasite?
Let me finish the last question. So if I wasn't involved in this, I probably would have hunted a lot more last year. My garden would have looked a whole lot better, and I would have just spent a whole lot more time on my family, myself, relaxing. But that's how our whole community felt. But by the flip side, if they had got what they wanted, it would have been 24/7 noise of building. I mean, this is only 3 miles from my house. It's not like this is a huge distance from me.
It's not remote from you.
No. And the people who are very involved with this, it literally would have been in their backyard. They would have been right up against the fence of their house. What would their quality of life be for the next 10 years? Was they're building this thing? So
no, go on.
No, it gets real personal when we're putting up these signs and you're sitting at a table with a bunch of retirement people, and they're like, retirement age people, and they're like, we got just enough coming in from this check. If we all pool, how much can we afford to give? I mean, they're giving every penny to this because it's that important to them. Jeez. That tears at your heart a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, you guys are like the North Vietnamese, people wondered, you fight America. How could anyone survive America? Well, when you're fighting for your home, it hits a little different. You're not fighting for a place. You're fighting for your home.
Our place. This is where we chose to live. And what I don't get is They got all these brown sites, and they're like, well, we just can't get them turned, the old factory sites. And they're like, we just can't get them turned around, and it's too expensive. And we figured they spent at least $20 million on the prep for the Eagle site. How many brown sites can you get ready for $20 million?
Jeez.
But I mean,
And the
they
fact
needed.
that this was treated like a done deal helped
yeah.
them burn money.
Yeah.
If they go slow, you don't spend the money until you know that you're going to get to the next step of the process.
They hired engineers, they hired environmental studies. And okay, here's the other thing. So we have a PFAS spill, like a lot of places in Michigan, and we have a Air Force or a Army National Guard base, and PFAS is used in firefighting. It's a foam. So for years, they just used to go out, do a test to make sure that the equipment worked, that they understood how to use it, and you'd spray some foam, and it makes this huge billowing white foam. And they'd spray it down, their drill's over, and they'd walk away and they'd leave it there. The problem is PFAS is a forever chemical. It can actually smother different chemical fires that water can't accelerates.
Wow.
So now this is on the soil. It's leaching in. So they do all this testing. They don't turn it over to the public. They don't even turn it over to the landowners, they being the LEAP contracted company. So now we hit current time period, we find out they did this. So the Army National Guard and Army Corps of Engineers and a number of others are now testing all these sites, saying, hey, here's where it is. And they're drilling test wells and doing soil samples. This company had stuff 2 years ago that they never gave to the Guard or the property owners. That's Michigan taxpayers paid for it.
Right.
They're still not sharing it with the public or the township, just the people that signed the NDA. And there are 2 other environmental studies they never shared with us. So what was the impact of those? What didn't they want us to know?
That's what strikes me. It's kind of a 1-2 punch. I'm sure 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it might have been controversial when Walmart came to town.
Sure.
I mean, down the street in Livonia, now they have 2. But at the time, it was a pretty big deal. But man, Walmart had to make its case to local officials. They had to show their face. They had to show up at the meetings. They had to at least present as being involved in the community and wanting to allay concerns. As a neighbor, they don't sound like a great neighbor, this megasite.
No. Well, here's the thing. The other part is, okay, so it's a Walmart. You know what a Walmart is.
Right.
Even if they had, when it's first coming in and they're procuring the property, they said, hey, it's a retail place. What they told us is it's manufacturing, and it has something to do with, the CHIPS Act or the Build Back America Better, and this is the funding for it.
Right.
We're like, so what's the industry? Well, it's manufacturing. Well, what kind of manufacturing? Well, we're bringing jobs back to America. It's like this circle. Now, the first one was Micron. Micron, they needed an incredible amount of water. Not as much as they were speccing out, which still makes us think there's something not right there. But some of the stuff that they can't make here is because of the EPA regulations. So how are we going to do? We're just going to overlook it? You told us for years they can't be here in the United States because they're too dirty, they're too dangerous, the impact of the environment is just off the scales.
Right.
Hey, by the way, we want to build one in your backyard. It's going to be okay. No guarantees why it's okay. Not telling you what's different about it. But hey, let's build one in your backyard.
And this, to me, I talk about her a lot on the show. This, to me, is the Whitmer effect. I've lived in Michigan most of my 40 years. I think maybe 1 year and 1 summer in D.C. I don't recall hearing about non-disclosure agreements until about the last 5 years. And now everyone's signing them?
The health director is the first one I ever heard about.
We got people signing, taking, what was it, confidentiality agreements with severance packages. Who gets a severance package from a government job?
No idea.
I remember when people used to get a pat on the back and thanks for their service, and that was it. You were an appointee, you're unappointed. Hit the bricks. I just don't get what is happening to our state. Troy, we'll get you out of here on this one. What is happening in Eagle right now? It's a 2-parter. So what's happening right now? And 2, I'm sure people see this and they're like, man, it takes bravery. It takes a community. Tell us how people can do what you did. How do people find that fight back within themselves when progress does come to town?
So first part of your question, where are we at now? We have our own zoning and planning. We took it from the county. We, you know, worked through the process. We brought in a contractor that helps townships set themselves up this way.
Mm.
They're doing a great job. We have great, people in our community who understand what they're doing. We've taken the training and we're working forward to have a good program here in Eagle. And we really don't know where it's at with MEDC because they've never talked to us. They never actually came to a township meeting and sat down and said, this is where we're at. This is what we think. They've always sent somebody else in their stead.
Even as
So
the tide turned,
even as the tide turned.
even as there's new leadership.
And the strategy is really simple because they kept coming to us saying, well, you've got to go talk to them. You've got to go tell them where you're at. You've got to go do it. And it's like, no, we're the township. You come to
Right.
an open meeting in front of the public, in front of God and everybody else, and you tell us what you want.
That is how business has always been done. This secretive stuff, I don't recognize it. You don't recognize it. And I think what you said earlier too about whether it's the school board or your township board, city hall, county commission, we cannot assume that our governments run themselves.
No,
Nothing does.
No.
Nothing does.
Somebody's doing it somewhere.
All these people need oversight. The more you like them, the more they need oversight. Because they might like themselves that much and they might start thinking, hey, I just got this. And maybe you guys don't need to do or to know what we're doing. Everybody needs oversight. And what also breaks my heart, it's like as the media does less of the oversight for us, the average citizen has to rise up. Maybe you're great at getting information. Maybe you're great at running for office.
So we fall back on, there's a point in time in American history. It's one of my favorite hats, by the way. You know who did the reporting? In the course of
human events,
You know who did the reporting back then?
Yeah.
Guys like you, guys like me. You sat your own stand up, you made some print, and you put it out, and you said, this is my viewpoint. This is where we're at.
Yes, we the people.
You're the new press.
Yeah. Which was the old press, which is someone with the means of production saying my viewpoint deserves wider berth than it's getting. That's all it is. That's all a tweet is or a newspaper is.
There was none of this letting the government and the mainstream media tell you who's your family, who's your neighbor. I mean, you're one of us. You're my community. You speak my language. You talk about your values the same way I talk about mine. So you're my neighbor. We live in the same state. We got the same problems. We want the same outcomes. And for too long, we've just had people telling us that, well, we need to take care of that for you. Why? Why can't we take care of it? I mean, you're pointing out how Detroit looks right now. A lot of people, they're like, oh, it's just full and we can't build anything in Detroit. Well, it looks kind of empty when I go down there a lot of times. Seems to be some room to put some new stuff in.
There's room for improvement in Detroit.
Well, and everybody wants Detroit to succeed in Michigan. It would be just as bad as if Grand Rapids started failing. You want your hubs to have good jobs.
It affects the rest of us, if only because, whenever they fail, you have to write a big check as a taxpayer or it'll be taken out of you. But also, we'd like a city that maybe your kid, if you have one, can grow up and live in someday and they don't have to move to Chicago.
Well, I mean, we have to have an environment that business can grow in, and we have to have an environment that people can have a good outcome in. And right now in Michigan, it's not working for a lot of people. So
that last question, how did you find it within you? There were before you had the 1776 hat, you had it in your heart. What was it in your heart that led you to fight back? And how can you help our listeners find it? Because I'm thinking there's going to be more like this and not less.
Well, I mean, it's an old saying, but the buck's got to stop somewhere. So for me, it's going to stop with me. I'm going to stand up. I'm going to make sure that the people in my community who can't go to all those meetings, I'm going to go for them. You've got to become the first level of representation for your community and your neighbors. And much like you're doing, you're the new wave of reporters. You're that new guy saying, hey, this story's got to be told. You got to step up and fill the niche that's there.
Right.
And what's happening right now is we keep having all these people tell us what their opinion is of what your opinion is. And what we have
Yes.
to do is stand up and say, no, my opinion is this doesn't happen here.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Troy, you're one of my my most fascinating people I follow on Twitter. Where can people find you on Twitter? Where can people learn more about the fight against the Eagle Township megasite?
Well, I'm on Twitter as Eagle Farmer, and that's my passion as I farm. I raise heritage breeds. I'm not a big farmer. It's just I grew up on a dairy farm, so I still like to maintain my roots. And I hope we do more stuff together in the future. So by following you, they can follow me. And I think that's all about rebuilding our communities. I think people really need to understand that this isn't a concept that's national. This is a concept that starts with the guy that lives next to you.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, I was raised in this whole don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics, and don't talk about anything that might upset somebody. Well, then I go, I went to Colonial Williamsburg. That's where I got the hat. And you read all these fascinating things about how our country was formed. No, they didn't all agree. I mean, they had some things they very much so did not agree with.
Right.
But they formed a union. They formed a community, and they said this is the path forward, and we need to do that again. We don't need people in the city or people in Washington telling us how we're going to form our nation and move forward. We do it every day when you get up in the morning and have coffee. Now I make a point of asking my neighbors how they're doing, what they think about the politics, what they think about the impact of what's happening around them. You got to talk to people. And you can't be afraid to say, hey, these things don't seem right to your neighbor. Because if you don't, no one else is going to talk to them. They're just going to get the buzz from the mainstream media.
Which will tell them that everything's okay on this deal that's already signed and you have no input on.
Well, yeah, it's so funny because in the middle of this, they told us there is literally nowhere else this can go in the nation. State of Michigan's got 10 million acres of land. There's nowhere else we could put this.
Anytime you hear talk like that, that should just it should tickle your spidey senses. Anytime you're sold a single truth, a single site, only one site in this great United States, like it just doesn't make any sense. And
no, it doesn't.
And if this is the only site it can happen, then why are you giving incentives for it to happen?
Well, exactly.
If they're stuck with you, why would you need to then entice them? It just, none of it makes sense.
We got great people in Michigan. We've never had a problem with having people that want to work. Our problem continues to be we have an environment that makes it hard for companies. It makes it harder the bigger they get. It makes it hard for them to continue to compete with companies that get insane amounts of government oversight. I mean, the Chinese companies, they might as well just say they're government companies because they can't fail over there. So we got to give people the opportunity to have a good job and have good work, but we got to get the government to get out of the way.
Yes. Troy, thank you.
Well, thank you. And anytime you want to have another one, I'm up for it, my friend.
Absolutely. We will definitely, maybe we should have you and Lori on at the same time and and tell some war stories. So thank you for taking the time and thank you for being a patriot.
Good to be on.
All right. Be well.
You too, my friend.